Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Jim Renacci. He's a former congressman from the state of Ohio. We're going to take a look at American businesses recovering and getting back to work from a global pandemic. Jim, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And it's really interesting with your background. You went from business to politics and back to business. Tell us about that.
Well, look, I was in business for almost 3 decades, got involved in my first company when I was 24 years old, got involved in multiple companies over a span of time, created 1,500 jobs, employed over 3,000 people. And one of my business, of course, was a Chevy dealership, a GM dealership. And that's what drove me into national politics. As most of your listeners might remember, 2009, when General Motors filed for bankruptcy and dealerships were terminated. Mine was one of those. I was concerned about the impact of government on good quality businesses, which mine was. I was working very closely with General Motors and actually transitioning and building a brand new building. So I realized that government was getting too deeply involved. That's what made me run for Congress, get involved for 8 years in Washington, 4 consecutive terms, and then leave because, of course, the federal government is a very frustrating place for an entrepreneur and somebody who is getting things done on a regular basis. And now I'm back in the business world with my own company and actually working with a number of companies as well.
So your thoughts on COVID-19 and the impact to businesses of all sizes, was it more extreme than you had expected it ever could be?
Well, absolutely. Look, it was unexpected. COVID-19, we were not prepared for, whether it was small business or large businesses. Our supply chains predominantly were, in places like China and places that were very difficult to get to. Now that COVID-19 is upon us, supply chains weakened. Many of the businesses had to look for other supply chains, looking for other alternatives. And I think there was a lack of preparation, which nobody had expected COVID-19, of course. And I think there'll be a lot of differences after we get through this, because we're going to have to make sure that our supply chains are strong. The ability to be able to continue to manufacture through a crisis is going to be necessary too. And I think, but in the end, I do believe small business and large businesses actually reacted better than expected.
Yeah, I would agree with you there for sure. And how have you managed your company's responses from employees, clients, and the communities that you serve?
Well, actually, we have. It's difficult. It's about communication. It's about making sure that you're always communicating. If there's one thing that I'm doing more than ever, I'm on the phone 7, 8, 9 hours a day, keeping people informed of what's going on, keeping clients, keeping businesses aware of the issues that are in front of us, what we're doing. And I think we've learned the communication probably, and we're doing it in different ways. It's not face-to-face communication anymore. It's more of the Skypes and the computer type communication platforms versus that day to day. So I think we've changed. I also think that's going to be something post COVID-19 that'll be much different as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking on a Zoom right now to get this interview out there. You touched upon this before. I want to bring it forward to getting the U.S. back to work and concerns about a disjointed response with returning to work and how social distancing will look like. I think the private sector has done a more coordinated job of figuring out what this will look like, and perhaps that will be the other side of COVID-19 as well. I'm just concerned that the response is disjointed, it's regional, it's local, and with lack of federal direction.
Well, one of the problems is certainty and predictability. And look, whether you're a small business, large business, any business I've run, you have to have that certainty and predictability. And that's the one thing that we haven't had. And a lot of that comes from government not giving certainty and predictability. When you have one state doing one thing, another state doing another thing, many times you have supply chains that are working with other states. The best example I can tell you is I have a business with a competitor in another state. And of course, Ohio was closed down a lot earlier than other states. So the other states that weren't closed down as quickly were able to compete and take business away from, clients here in Ohio. So I think that's one of the problems when you have a disjointed effect. You actually cause things like that to occur, which is not fair. But it's also the certainty and predictability of when you can reopen, how you can reopen, what the stages are, what states different than other states. That's been the challenge for most businesses. And again, I think I've said this even before I went to Washington. The businesses will adapt, and they're good at adapting, especially if they know what they're adapting to and what they're adapting for and what the changes are going to be. Since we did have some disjointed differences between states and still do, I think that's probably the greatest challenge.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So realistically, what would be the best response with government and businesses? Because where we are in the New York, New Jersey area, it's going to look certainly very different to populations that are less dense than we are. So in a perfect world, or even if we could look at this through a realistic lens, what would that look like?
Well, I think, look, we do have areas, and you hit that, those states. I mean, you got New York, New Jersey, you've got states that Washington State that are definitely a little bit in a little bit different situation than states like North Dakota and South Dakota, and some of the other states, even Ohio. Some of the precautions that some states need to take and should take might be different than other states. But I think in the end, what we should be looking at is a way that business can work through this by just having, the ideas of where we're going to be. I mean, every day I hear, well, New York's not going to open, but Florida's going to open, Ohio's going to open, Michigan's still going to be tough to open, and they're going to be doing some things different. I think in the end, when government can come together and give business the opportunity to know what the direction is, because we're not in, and most businesses don't just work within their own state, they work globally and they work nationally, and we've got to have the ability to understand. But I think what we should do is we should have had a situation where we at least know based on statistics and timing where every state will be. Today, we still don't know where New York might be, or New Jersey, or even some of the states that have tighter restrictions. And I think that's a problem. We need to continue to think about certainty and predictability for those businesses so the economy can get back to growing.
And to wrap up here, the economy on the other side of COVID-19, you had mentioned before that from a technology perspective, work at home, a lot of things that we do at home, telecommuting from home certainly is going to change. What other areas do you think will look different? Well, we have learned what this looks like when we pay attention to data and coordinated responses, even from the science and health side. Will this help carry us through to the next pandemic or global crisis that we have to face?
Well, not only do I think it'll help us carry it through, but we'll be able to go through the next crisis. Look, as I said, businesses are resilient. Many businesses, not all, because some don't prepare. It's one of the concerns I had when I was in Washington. We were always crisis oriented, and if you're a crisis oriented business, you're probably not going to come back after COVID-19. Versus a business who is always looking to the next year, the next 2 years, the next 5 years, even the next 10 years in their growth pattern. So I think that will be an issue, but right, we're going to have a lot of different changes. I mean, and it depends on what market you're in. Each one of these markets will have to look at ways where their supply chains have multiple areas where they can go to. So, some businesses were reliant 100% on China. That can't happen in the future. And I think most businesses will now not be looking just at costs, which is one of the drivers. It was definitely cheaper. Even one of my manufacturing businesses before Congress, it was cheaper to go through China. I think in the end, we're going to have to look for more reliable sources, supply chain sources versus the cheapest supply chain sources. And depending on what market you're in, I mean, the real estate market, we talked about that. There'll be more people working from home. I think post-COVID-19, you're going to see a potential glut in real estate because people aren't going to need as big an office because they're going to be working more from home. So there are a number of issues that I think are going to be interesting as we get out of this crisis and move forward. But remember, there will be a new crisis. I think this will prepare us for that new crisis as well.
All right, let's certainly hope so. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.